In this video, we are going to be building a complete login and registration system using PHP and MySQL. As you can see here, if I input my details here and create a password and click on register, an account is created. I can then use those account details to log in here by inputting the account details, my email, my password, and then clicking on login. Once I log in, you can see that my email and my username is displayed here. This data is stored on a MySQL database here. So as you can see, if I take my account here and modify my name, you can see when I go back to the website and refresh, my name is modified as well. So let me show you how to build this with PHP and a MySQL database. So we're going to start with an index.html page for a registration page and login page we built in the previous video. So once you have this page, the first step you need to take is to install Xamp, because that is going to be our server. So go to Google and Google Xamp download and click on the first link. Then scroll down and click here to download Xamp. Once it is downloaded, you need to click on the installer. From there, just install the software in your C directory. Once Xamp is installed, you need to click on Finish. From here, you are going to need to save your HTML form using the Apache server. Here's how you do it. First, you copy the folder in which your files are into the Xamp directory. It's usually in your C directory, in Xamp, and then htdocs. Once you've copied it, you need to rename it to something simple. I'll name mine PHP login, and I'll open it in Visual Studio Code. From there, I'll rename my file from index.html to index.php because we are going to be using the language PHP. Once you are done with this, you are going to need to open Xamp. Make sure you run it as system administrator. Once it's open, click on Start for the Apache server and Start for the MySQL server. To go to MySQL, you can click on Admin here, and this will take you to our database here. To access your website, you need to click on the address bar here and type localhost followed by the name of the folder, and you'll see that your website is being displayed here. All we need to do now is write the code to connect to our database. But the first thing we need to do is create our database. So go back to your PHP admin here. Click on New here. Give our database a name and then click on Create. From there, we need to create our user table. We will name our table users and we'll have 5 columns. The first column is going to be ID, and it's going to have 11 characters. It's going to be an integer, and it's going to be our primary row. Another thing I failed to mention here is you need to click on this button here. Our next input field is full name. It's going to be a variable character. It's going to be 255 characters long, and the rest of the fields you can just leave them. Next is our email. It's going to have the same settings, and our password is also going to have the same settings. And finally, created at is going to be a timestamp, and it's going to have current time here. So click on Save to generate our table here. So once our table is generated, we will need to connect to our database. But first, you can go to Privileges and see all the users that are available on your database. As you can see, here we have root and localhost. So go back to Visual Studio Code and create a file called Connect.php. In this file, we are going to write the code to connect to our database. So the first thing we'll do is define the variables of our database. The first variable is going to be our server name, in which case ours is localhost, our username is root, and our password is nothing since we haven't set a password yet. Our database name is going to be Login because that's the name of our database. As you can see back here, you can check all this here. So once you are sure this is correct, we can create our connection. To create our connection is simple. We just create a variable called con and use this method here. In this method, we are going to pass in all our variables. We are going to pass in our server, our username, our password, and our database name. And lastly, all we need to do is say if the connection gives us an error, then output the statement connection failed. That's it for our Connect.php. I think it's correct, so let's move on. The next thing we'll need to do is make sure that in our login form, the action is Connect.php to test this. That way, when we click on submit, it launches this form. As you can see, when I click here, we don't get an error. We don't get that line, a connection failed. So our connection is successful. So once our connection is successful, we can now write the code to register a user. So go back to Visual Studio Code and create a file called Register.php. In this file, we are going to start by opening a PHP tag, and then we are going to include Connect.php. That way, this code from our connect file is brought into our file here. After that, we are going to say if the server request method is equals to post. In other words, if the user submits the form, we're going to run this code here. So the first thing we'll do is define a variable for the full name, and we're going to take it using the name full name here. So go back to our index.php and check that our input tag has the name full name, and also our action has the action register.php, and our method for the form is post. Then make sure that our input tags have the correct names. And also, I just realized we need another input field for email here. So I'll just write that quickly. And then we'll go back to our register.php and define the other variables for email and for our password. Once our variables are defined, the first thing we need to do is check if the email inputted already exists in the database, because our email is going to be what we use to log in. So it has to be unique, so no two users must be allowed to have the same email. To check if an email exists in the database, we are going to define a variable check email. That's going to be an SQL statement. We are going to select all rows from the user table where the email is equals to the email inputted. To run the query is simple. We just define the variable for results and set that to the connection query and pass check email into it. If the results give us a number of rows greater than 0, then the email exists. Else, we are going to create an account. So here's what to do. We take in the user data we need and we check if the email exists. If the email exists, we're going to echo the words email already exists. If the email doesn't exist, we are going to create an account. To create an account, we need to input those user details into our database. So here's how we do that. The first thing we're going to do is hash the password of our user by defining a hashed password variable and then using the method password hash with our password passed into it. To insert our user details into our database, we're going to define an SQL variable. This is going to contain the HTML query to insert the users into our database. If you know SQL, you'll recognize this. Basically, we're just inserting into our user table these values here. So next we're just going to say if this SQL query here returns true, we are going to echo the words account is created, or else we are going to echo error. So this is how we input our user details into our database. So if I go back to the form here and input my user details, you can see that our account is created. If I try to create another user using the same email, it will give me an error. If I use another email, it will create the account. And as you can see, this data is saved in our database here. We can use a script tag to make this more user-friendly by using an alert to notify the user that an account is created and then redirecting them back to the index.php page so that they can log in with their newly created account. So to recap, here's what we have for Register.php. We get the user details, we check if the email exists. If the email exists, we don't create an account, but if the email exists, we are going to create your account. Now, we want to write the code for the login page here. This will allow our users to log in using the account they just created. So to do that, first let's make sure that our input tags are correct and they have the correct names. We'll need your email and your password. Then make sure that this action here has Login.php, so we're going to create that file. And also the method has to be post for the login form here. So the first thing we're going to do in Login.php is include Connect.php because we need it for the connection. We're going to do the same thing we did in Register.php. If the server request method is post, we're going to take the data from our form using their names. We're going to have a variable for the email. Once we have our email and password, we are going to use our email to fetch all the rows in our database that contain that email. We will do that using an SQL query. And if that SQL query results in more than 0 rows, we're going to define a user variable and associate it with the result. So from there, we verify that a user exists. Now we need to check if the password entered by the user is correct. So to do that, we are going to say if, then use a built-in method called password verify. In here, we are going to pass the password inputted by the user and also the password from our database. If this is successful, we are going to tell the user that they have a successful login and later redirect them to our dashboard page. So to test it, yes, how that works. As you can see, no email exists. That email doesn't exist. If I try again, you can see that if I input a random email here, that email doesn't exist in our database. If I input a real email, it will take us here. Here we need to define a variable. We need to define an else statement here so that when the password is wrong, we give the user feedback. So I'll just echo wrong password here. So as you can see, it'll give me wrong password here if the user email exists, but I enter the wrong password. If I enter a correct password, you'll see I have successfully logged in and I can see my username there. So the last thing I want to do here is redirect the user to our dashboard page. I can do that using the header with the location where I want to redirect the user. From there, we'll need to create our dashboard.php. To save you time on this video, I've already created the HTML as well as the CSS for our dashboard.php. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm just going to copy those to our files here. Once they are copied, we'll need to write the PHP to fetch our user name and our email to this page here. But the first thing we can do is write the code for logout. So for logout.php, what we do is very easy. We are going to start the session, answer the session, destroy all sessions, and then redirect the user back to the index.php page because we are logging out. To link it to the dashboard page, we are going to enclose the button here in an anchor tag, and within the href of that anchor tag, we are going to use logout.php. So when I go back here and click on logout, you can see I can log out. Let's write the code to fetch our username and our email here. At the top of our dashboard page here, we are going to open and close a PHP tag. Then we are going to start our session and include Connect.php. So here in the dashboard.php, we are going to say if a user session doesn't exist, we are going to redirect the user back to the index.html page. But if the user exists, we are going to define an email variable using the user session. And we're going to write an SQL query to select all the rows where our email match. And then we're going to do the same and associate those results with the user. From there, I'm going to define a variable for name by using our user and full name here. I can display it using the echo command here. So when I go back to our dashboard page here, you can see my email there, my full name and email there. To display this in our dashboard page is simple. We are going to go to where our username is, and we are going to replace what's there with this PHP command here. And as you can see, our email is updated there. And also for our username, we can also do the same thing. We are currently working on an HTML course, which we are going to release hopefully soon. And that's going to introduce you to the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.